On the first day of October in the year 331, before the Common Era, two of history's most formidable armies faced each other on the dusty plains of Gaugamela, near what is today the city of Mosul in Iraq. This confrontation would determine not merely the fate of two kingdoms, but the entire trajectory of world civilization for the next 1,000 years. Alexander of Macedon, barely 25 years old, stood at the head of approximately 47,000 battle-hardened veterans who had already conquered much of the known world. Facing him across the carefully prepared battlefield was Darius III, King of Kings, commander of the vast Persian Empire that stretched from India to Egypt, leading what ancient sources claim was an army of over 1 million men, though modern historians place more conservative estimates between 250,000 to 300,000 troops. The numbers alone tell a story of desperate odds. Alexander's force, though smaller, represented the culmination of decades of military innovation begun by his father Philip II of Macedon. These 47,000 men were not merely soldiers, but components of a revolutionary military machine. 40,000 infantry formed the backbone of this force, including 9,000 Macedonian phalangites, wielding the fearsome sarissa pikes, 7,000 allied Greek hoplites, carrying traditional spears and shields, 5,000 mercenaries from across the Mediterranean, and 19,000 light infantry, including archers, javelin throwers, and skirmishers from the mountainous regions of the Balkans. The cavalry component, numbering 7,000, was perhaps even more crucial to Alexander's tactical system. 1,800 companion cavalry formed the elite strike force, trained from childhood to fight alongside their king in the devastating wedge formation that had already shattered Persian lines at the Granicus River and Bessus. 1,800 Thessalian horsemen, renowned throughout Greece for their skill, anchored the left wing, while 3,400 allied and mercenary cavalry provided flexibility and depth to the mounted arm. Darius had learned from his previous defeats. The Persian army that assembled at Gaugamela represented the largest mobilization in the empire's history. Contingents had marched from the furthest reaches of the known world. From the eastern satrapies came Bactrians and Sogdians, masters of horse archery, who could loose arrows with deadly accuracy at full gallop. From the Indian borderlands came war elephants, massive beasts that stood over 10 feet tall and could trample through infantry formations while carrying armed crews in wooden towers. Scythian horsemen from the steppes beyond the Caspian Sea brought their double-curved bows and generations of nomadic warfare experience. The Persian heartland provided the immortals, the elite 10,000 infantry, who formed the backbone of imperial power, while Greek mercenaries, veterans of countless campaigns, offered professional military expertise that rivaled Alexander's own troops. But perhaps most innovative were the 200 scythed chariots that Darius had commissioned specifically for this battle. These were not the light racing chariots used for transportation or hunting, but heavy war machines, with razor-sharp blades extending from their wheels and axles. Each chariot was pulled by 4 horses and designed to slice through enemy formations, like a mechanical scythe through wheat. Accompanying these were 15 Indian war elephants, creatures that most of Alexander's soldiers had never seen, whose very presence could cause panic among horses and inexperienced troops. The Persian king had also prepared the battlefield itself, spending weeks having his engineers level the ground and remove obstacles that might impede his chariots or prevent his vastly superior numbers from deploying effectively. The technological disparity between the two armies reflected centuries of different military evolution. The Macedonian sarissa, at 18 to 21 feet in length, was nearly twice as long as traditional Greek spears, and far longer than Persian weapons. This reach advantage meant that Macedonian phalangites could strike their enemies, while remaining beyond the range of retaliation. The pike required extensive training to use effectively in formation, but once mastered, it created a nearly impenetrable hedge of iron points. Each phalangitite carried a small shield strapped to his left arm, leaving both hands free to manipulate the unwieldy sarissa, while bronze armor protected his torso and a distinctive Macedonian helmet guarded his head. The Persian forces, by contrast, represented a more traditional approach to warfare that had served the empire well for 2 centuries. Heavy cavalry, known as cataphracts, wore scale armor that covered both horse and rider, making them nearly invulnerable to arrows, and capable of delivering crushing charges against infantry. Persian archers used composite bows constructed from horn, wood, and sinew, which could drive arrows through most armor at considerable distances. The famous Persian immortals carried shorter spears and large wicker shields, relying on numbers and disciplined formations rather than technological superiority. However, this diversity of equipment and tactics, while providing flexibility, also created command and coordination challenges that would prove decisive in the coming battle. The strategic situation leading to Gaugamela had been shaped by Alexander's previous victories and Darius's desperate need to halt the Macedonian advance. After defeating Persian forces at the Granicus River in 334, Alexander had systematically conquered the wealthy coastal cities of Asia Minor, denying Darius both revenue and naval bases. The victory at Issus in 333 had been even more significant, as Alexander had not only defeated Darius personally, but captured the Persian royal family, including the king's mother, wife, and children. This gave Alexander both valuable hostages and a powerful psychological advantage. Following Issus, Alexander had turned south to secure Egypt, establishing the city of Alexandria, and ensuring that no Persian forces remained in his rear. Meanwhile, Darius had used the respite to gather the largest army in Persian history. The king had learned from his previous defeats that he needed to face Alexander on favorable terrain with overwhelming numbers. The plain of Gaugamela offered exactly what Darius sought, a vast expanse of level ground where his numerical superiority could be brought to bear, and his scythed chariots could operate effectively. Alexander's approach to Gaugamela revealed both his tactical genius and his understanding of psychological warfare. Rather than rushing into battle, he spent several days reconnoitering the Persian positions, allowing his soldiers to see the enormous enemy army while demonstrating his own confidence through careful preparation. On the night before the battle, while his officers urged him to attack under cover of darkness to negate the Persian numerical advantage, Alexander famously replied that he would not steal a victory, demonstrating the supreme confidence that had carried him from Macedonia to the heart of the Persian Empire. The dawn of October first revealed the full magnitude of the impending confrontation. Darius had arranged his forces in a formation designed to maximize every advantage. The scythed chariots formed the front line, positioned to charge directly into the advancing Macedonian phalanx and break up its formation before the main engagement began. Behind them, the 15 war elephants were stationed at key points where their psychological impact would be greatest. The center of the Persian line was anchored by Darius himself, surrounded by his personal guard and the elite units that formed the core of imperial power. Greek mercenaries, perhaps 15,000 strong, provided a solid block of professional infantry that could match the Macedonian phalanx in training and equipment. The Persian left wing, commanded by Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, consisted primarily of cavalry forces from the eastern provinces. Bactrian and Sogdian horsemen, expert archers, who could fight effectively both mounted and on foot, formed the bulk of this wing. Scythian cavalry, masters of the feigned retreat and the devastating return charge, provided additional mobility and striking power. This wing was positioned to sweep around the Macedonian right and attack from multiple directions simultaneously. On the Persian right, Mazaeus, satrap of Babylon, and perhaps the most competent of Darius's field commanders, controlled a mixed force of cavalry and infantry, drawn from Syria, Mesopotamia, and other western satrapies. This wing included some of the empire's best heavy cavalry, armored horsemen, capable of delivering decisive charges against enemy formations. Mazaeus had been given specific instructions to break through the Macedonian left and capture Alexander's camp, potentially forcing the young king to break off his own attack to deal with threats to his rear. Alexander's deployment reflected years of tactical evolution and intimate knowledge of his army's capabilities. The Macedonian king had arranged his forces in what would later be called an oblique formation, though this term oversimplifies the sophisticated tactical system he employed. The right wing, where Alexander personally commanded the companion cavalry, was advanced relative to the center, creating an angled line that would allow maximum striking power to be concentrated at the decisive point, while refusing battle on the left until the right had achieved success. The companion cavalry, 1,800 of Macedonia's finest horsemen, form the tip of Alexander's tactical spear. These men had trained together since childhood, many of them sons of Macedonian nobility who had grown up alongside their king. They fought in the distinctive wedge formation that allowed maximum impact at the point of contact, while providing flexibility for rapid maneuvers. Each companion carried a long lance called a ziston, perfect for charging enemy formations, and a sword for close combat. Their horses were carefully selected and trained, capable of precise movements in formation and fearless in the face of enemy weapons. The Macedonian phalanx occupied the center of Alexander's line, but unlike traditional Greek formations, it was arranged in depth with multiple supporting units. The front ranks consisted of the elite phalangites, veterans who had fought in every major engagement since the army crossed into Asia. Behind them, allied Greek hoplites provided additional weight and stability, while light infantry filled gaps and provided missile support. The entire formation was designed to advance steadily while maintaining cohesion, creating an irresistible forward pressure that had already broken Persian resistance twice before. The Macedonian left wing presented perhaps the greatest challenge for Alexander's tactical system. Here, Parmenion, the veteran general who had served both Philip and Alexander with distinction, commanded the Thessalian cavalry and additional allied forces. Parmenion's role was essentially defensive, to hold his position against superior enemy numbers, while Alexander achieved victory on the right. This required not only tactical skill, but also precise timing and communication across the entire battlefield. As the sun rose higher on that October morning, both armies began their final preparations. Persian priests conducted elaborate rituals intended to ensure divine favor, while Darius himself appeared in his golden chariot, wearing the traditional royal robes that marked him as the successor to Cyrus and Darius the Great. The sight of the Persian king, surrounded by his magnificent guard, and the standards of a dozen satrapies, was intended to inspire his own troops while intimidating the enemy. Alexander's preparations were characteristically different. The young king moved among his soldiers on foot, calling many by name and reminding them of previous victories and shared hardships. He wore the same armor as his companions, distinguished only by the white plumes on his helmet, and the small golden lion that marked his shield. This personal touch, this connection between commander and soldier, had been carefully cultivated throughout the campaign, and would prove decisive in the coming hours. The battle began not with the clash of armies, but with the failure of Persian innovation. Darius launched his scythed chariots in a massive frontal assault, intended to shatter the Macedonian phalanx, before the main engagement could begin. 200 of these mechanical terrors rolled across the plain, their blade-equipped wheels glinting in the morning sun, as they built up speed for maximum impact. The sight must have been terrifying for soldiers who had never encountered such weapons, and indeed, many armies of the period would have broken and fled before such an assault. But Alexander had prepared for exactly this contingency. As the chariots approached, the Macedonian phalanx demonstrated the discipline and training that made it the most feared infantry formation of its era. Instead of presenting a solid target, the phalangites opened corridors in their ranks, allowing the chariots to pass through without causing significant casualties. Light infantry armed with javelins targeted the chariot horses and drivers, while soldiers who had been specifically detailed for this purpose grabbed the reins of passing chariots and killed the crews. Those chariots that did make contact with formed troops found that the long sarissas created an impenetrable barrier that horses would not charge. The failure of the chariot attack had profound psychological implications beyond its tactical impact. Darius had invested enormous resources in these weapons, and their ineffectiveness against Macedonian discipline demonstrated that Persian innovation could not overcome the fundamental advantages that Alexander's army possessed. More importantly, the failure occurred in full view of both armies, undermining Persian confidence while reinforcing Macedonian belief in their tactical superiority. With the chariot attack neutralized, Alexander launched his own assault, beginning the sequence of maneuvers that would be studied by military theorists for the next 2 millennia. The key to Alexander's tactical system was the creation of a gap in the enemy line through concentrated pressure at a single point, followed by exploitation of that gap with his elite cavalry. As the Macedonian phalanx advanced in its characteristic oblique formation, it created exactly the pressure differential that Alexander sought. The Persian left wing, commanded by Bessus, initially held firm against the advancing Macedonians. Bactrian and Sogdian cavalry launched a series of attacks against Alexander's right wing, hoping to disrupt the companion cavalry before it could achieve decisive impact. These horsemen were skilled warriors, masters of the composite bow, who could deliver devastating volleys while maintaining the mobility to avoid counterattack. However, they faced not only the companions, but also supporting units that Alexander had carefully positioned for exactly this contingency. Light cavalry and missile troops protected the flanks of the companion wedge, engaging the Bactrian horsemen and preventing them from interfering with Alexander's main assault. Simultaneously, the hypaspists, elite infantry who served as the link between the phalanx and the cavalry, advanced with perfect coordination, maintaining the connection between different arms of the army that was essential to Macedonian tactical success. The critical moment came when the oblique advance of the Macedonian line created exactly the gap that Alexander had anticipated. As the phalanx pressed forward against the Persian center, the natural tendency of the line to stretch and thin became apparent. Bessus, commanding the Persian left, was faced with a choice between maintaining contact with the center and pursuing the Macedonian right wing, which appeared to be moving away from the main battle line. His decision to follow Alexander's movement, hoping to envelop the Macedonian right, created the opening that the young king had been waiting for. Alexander's charge through the gap in the Persian line has become one of the most famous cavalry actions in military history, but its success depended on far more than individual courage or tactical inspiration. The companion cavalry had trained for precisely this maneuver, practicing the coordination required to maintain formation, while changing direction and speed in response to battlefield conditions. The wedge formation allowed maximum impact at the point of contact, while providing the flexibility to exploit opportunities as they developed. As the companions burst through the gap in the Persian line, they found themselves in the rear of enemy formations that were still engaged with the advancing Macedonian phalanx. This created a psychological crisis for the Persian center, which suddenly found itself attacked from 2 directions simultaneously. Darius, commanding from his chariot in the midst of his guard, could see the Macedonian cavalry approaching his position with devastating effect. The moment of Darius's flight marked the climax of the battle and demonstrated the fundamental weakness of the Persian system. Unlike Alexander, who led from the front and shared the dangers of combat with his soldiers, Darius commanded from a position that, while safer, isolated him from the immediate tactical situation. When the Persian king saw Alexander's cavalry approaching and heard reports that his charioteer had been killed by a Macedonian spear, he made the fateful decision to flee the battlefield. The psychological impact of the royal flight cannot be overstated. Throughout the Persian Empire, The person of the king was considered semi-divine, the earthly representative of Ahura Mazda, and the symbol of imperial power. When soldiers saw their king fleeing, it created a crisis of confidence that no amount of tactical skill could overcome. Units that had been fighting effectively suddenly found themselves questioning not only the immediate battle, but the entire legitimacy of their cause. However, the battle was far from over. While Alexander achieved dramatic success on the right wing, the situation on the Macedonian left had become increasingly desperate. Mazaeus, commanding the Persian right wing, had proven himself every bit as capable as his reputation suggested. His cavalry had not only had their ground against Parmenion's forces, but had achieved a breakthrough that threatened the entire Macedonian position. Persian horsemen had broken through the Macedonian left and were advancing toward Alexander's camp, where the army's baggage train and non-combatants waited under minimal guard. The capture of the camp would not only provide valuable plunder, but could potentially force Alexander to break off his own successful attack to deal with threats to his rear. This was exactly the kind of tactical dilemma that had defeated other armies when faced with Persian numerical superiority. Parmenion, recognizing the gravity of the situation, sent urgent messages to Alexander, requesting immediate reinforcement. This created one of the most difficult command decisions of the young king's career. On one hand, his attack on the Persian center was achieving spectacular success, and Darius's flight offered the possibility of ending the battle decisively. On the other hand, the threat to his own army's rear could not be ignored, and Parmenion was not a commander given to panic or exaggeration. Alexander's response demonstrated both his tactical flexibility and his understanding of the broader strategic situation. Rather than abandoning his attack entirely, he detailed a portion of his reserve to assist Parmenion, while continuing to pressure the Persian center with the remainder of his forces. This required precise coordination and timing, as the forces sent to assist the left wing had to disengage from their current positions without creating gaps that the enemy could exploit. The resolution of the crisis on the Macedonian left showcased the advantages of superior training and unit cohesion. The troops Alexander sent to reinforce Parmenion were not merely additional numbers, but professionally trained soldiers who could integrate seamlessly with existing formation. When they struck the Persian cavalry that had broken through to the camp area, they did so with coordinated precision that multiplied their effective strength far beyond their actual numbers. Meanwhile, the collapse of the Persian center continued to accelerate. With Darius in flight and the royal guard in disarray, the psychological foundation of Persian resistance crumbled. Units that had been fighting effectively suddenly found themselves isolated and surrounded, facing Macedonian forces that seemed to appear from every direction simultaneously. The careful battle plan that Darius had developed, based on coordinated attacks from multiple wings, fell apart as communication broke down and individual commanders made independent decisions about whether to continue fighting or seek safety in retreat. The war elephants, which had been positioned to provide maximum psychological impact, became a liability as the battle turned against their handlers. These massive beasts, while impressive, required skilled management and favorable conditions to be effective. As the Persian formations around them collapsed, the elephants became confused and in some cases turned back into their own lines, causing additional chaos among troops who were already demoralized by their king's flight. The pursuit phase of the battle revealed another aspect of Alexander's military genius. While many commanders throughout history have achieved victory through superior tactics, far fewer have understood how to exploit success without overextending their forces or losing control of the situation. Alexander's pursuit of the fleeing Persians was selective and purposeful, designed to maximize the psychological impact of victory, while preserving his army's cohesion and capability for future operations. The young king personally led the pursuit of Darius, hoping to capture the Persian monarch and end the war definitively. This chase continued for miles across the Mesopotamian plain, with Alexander's companions maintaining formation, even at high speed across difficult terrain. However, Darius had too great a head start, and his knowledge of local conditions allowed him to escape toward the eastern satrapies, where he could attempt to raise another army. The aftermath of Gaugamela revealed the full scope of Alexander's victory. Persian casualties, while impossible to determine precisely from ancient sources, were certainly enormous. Modern historians estimate that tens of thousands of Persian soldiers died during the battle and subsequent pursuit, representing not only individual tragedies, but the destruction of military units that had taken years to train and equip. The loss of equipment was equally significant, as the Persian army abandoned not only weapons and armor, but also the baggage train that contained the accumulated wealth of multiple satrapies. For Alexander's army, the casualties were remarkably light, considering the scale of the engagement. Ancient sources report only 100 Macedonian dead and approximately 1,000 wounded, figures that, even if understated, represent a dramatic disparity that reflected the tactical superiority of the Macedonian system. More importantly, these losses were sustainable for an army that had developed effective methods for integrating replacements and maintaining unit effectiveness, despite ongoing casualties. The strategic consequences of Gaugamela extended far beyond the immediate military results. The battle effectively ended organized Persian resistance in Mesopotamia and opened the path to the empire's heartland. Babylon, the ancient center of civilization, surrendered without resistance, providing Alexander with enormous wealth and a secure base for further operations. The treasuries of Persepolis and Susa, accumulated over centuries of imperial expansion, fell into Macedonian hands, funding future campaigns and rewarding the soldiers who had made victory possible. Perhaps more significantly, Gaugamela demonstrated the obsolescence of traditional Persian military methods when faced with the innovations that Philip and Alexander had developed. The battle was not merely a contest between two armies, but between two different approaches to warfare, two different ways of organizing society for military purposes. The Macedonian victory represented the triumph of professional military organization over traditional imperial levies, of tactical innovation over numerical superiority, of centralized command over dispersed authority. The technological lessons of Gaugamela would influence military development for centuries. The failure of the scythed chariots demonstrated that mechanical innovations, no matter how impressive, could not overcome fundamental tactical disadvantages. The effectiveness of the sarissa phalanx confirmed that longer weapons, properly employed, provided decisive advantages in infantry combat. Most importantly, the battle showed that coordination between different military arms, particularly infantry and cavalry, could multiply the effectiveness of each component far beyond what either could achieve independently. The command decisions made during the battle became subjects of study for future military leaders. Alexander's ability to maintain strategic vision while adapting to tactical developments, his willingness to take personal risks at crucial moments, and his understanding of how to exploit psychological advantages all became models for later commanders. Conversely, Darius's failures, particularly his decision to flee when the battle could still have been salvaged, became cautionary examples of how personal courage and strategic thinking must be combined for successful military leadership. The broader historical significance of Gaugamela cannot be understood merely in military terms. The battle marked the end of the Persian Empire as an independent power, and the beginning of the Hellenistic period, during which Greek culture and institutions would spread throughout the known world. The cities that Alexander founded, the administrative systems he established, and the cultural synthesis he encouraged would shape civilization from Egypt to India for the next 1,000 years. For the soldiers who fought at Gaugamela, the victory represented validation of years of training, sacrifice, and shared hardship. These men, many of whom had left Macedonia as teenagers, had now defeated the greatest empire of their age and secured wealth beyond their wildest dreams. Yet they also faced the prospect of continued campaigning in unknown lands against unfamiliar enemies, as Alexander's ambitions extended far beyond the conquest of Persia. The battle also marked a personal transformation for Alexander himself. At 25, he had now defeated every major power that opposed him, and controlled territories stretching from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. The young man who had crossed the Hellespont 3 years earlier with dreams of avenging Greek defeats in the Persian Wars had become the master of the known world. Yet this success also brought new challenges, as the problems of ruling a vast, diverse empire would prove even more complex than the military campaigns that had created it. Gaugamela stands as perhaps the finest example of ancient tactical warfare, demonstrating how superior organization, training, and leadership could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The battle validated the military reforms that Philip of Macedon had initiated, and that his son had perfected through years of constant campaigning. It showed how a relatively small professional army could defeat vastly superior numbers through coordination, discipline, and tactical innovation. The historiographical record of Gaugamela, while incomplete, provides more detail than most ancient battles due to the presence of educated observers, who later wrote accounts of their experiences. Ptolemy, who became one of Alexander's successor kings, wrote a detailed history that served as a source for later historians. Similarly, Aristobulus, an engineer who accompanied the expedition, provided technical details about equipment and tactics that would otherwise have been lost. However, modern historians must approach these sources with appropriate skepticism, recognizing that ancient authors often exaggerated numbers and emphasized dramatic moments over mundane details. The absence of Persian sources creates additional challenges, as we see the battle almost entirely through Macedonian eyes. Archaeological evidence from the battlefield itself remains limited, making it difficult to verify specific details about troop positions or casualty figures. Despite these limitations, Gaugamela remains one of the best documented battles of the ancient world and continues to provide insights into the nature of ancient warfare. The tactical principles demonstrated by Alexander, the importance of combined arms coordination, the value of superior training over numerical advantage, and the decisive role of leadership remain relevant to military theorists today. The battle serves not only as a historical milestone, but as a timeless example of how human courage, intelligence, and organization can overcome seemingly